I'm Teresa Skubik, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, December 17th. Rob Reiner's son, Nick Reiner, is expected to be charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the deaths of his parents, a case that has shocked Hollywood and the Democratic political circles where both were widely respected and admired. Prosecutors say the 32-year-old is suspected in the killing of legendary actor and director Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner. Los Angeles District Attorney Nathan Hochman made the announcement at a news conference alongside Police Chief Jim McDonnell.
Today I'm here to announce that our office will be filing charges against Nick Reiner, who is accused of killing his parents, actor-director Rob Reiner, and photographer-producer Michelle Singer Reiner. These charges will be 2 counts of first-degree murder with the special circumstance of multiple murders. He also faces a special allegation that he personally used a dangerous and deadly weapon, that being a knife. These charges carry a maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole or the death penalty. No decision at this point has been made with respect to the death penalty. We have requested, and currently Nick Reiner is being held without bail. Once the charges get filed this afternoon, Nick Reiner will be then brought to court. He is going through medical clearance, something that everybody who gets arrested and gets held in a Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department jail goes through. Once he is medically cleared, he will be brought to court to be arraigned on these charges. At that point, he will enter a plea of guilty or not guilty.
The Trump administration is expanding its travel ban to include 5 more countries and impose new limits on others. The move on Tuesday is part of the ongoing effort to tighten U.S. entry standards for travel and immigration. The decision follows the arrest of an Afghan national suspected in the shooting of 2 National Guard troops over Thanksgiving weekend. In June, President Donald Trump announced that citizens from 12 countries would be banned from entering the United States, while travelers from 7 additional countries would face heightened restrictions. The administration says the new measures are aimed at preventing potential security threats. And the federal government's new Buy Canadian procurement rules took effect on Tuesday as trade tensions with the United States continue. Announced by Prime Minister Mark Carney in September, the policy requires the federal government to prioritize domestically made components for major infrastructure and defense projects. Procurement Minister Joel Lightbound said the rules apply immediately to government contracts valued at $25 million or more and will expand to include contracts worth $5 million and above by the spring of 2026.
Our government has been clear. It's time to build, and we're making generational investments to build things right here at home. We are guided by new strategies around things like critical minerals, defense spending, high-speed rail, and housing construction. But it's not just what we build, it matters how we build. And importantly, we're building Canadian. That's why I'm glad to be here to announce the next step of our Buy Canadian policy. Because Canada needs to be its own best customer. When the federal government spends, we will prioritize companies and the use of Canadian materials. This is a big shift in how government operates, and we're doing it to maximize the use of public dollars to strengthen domestic supply chains, build industrial capacity, and support local businesses and jobs. Today, I'm announcing that our Buy Canadian policy is coming into force. Starting today, the Buy Canadian policy delivers 2 clear actions. First, Canadian suppliers and Canadian content are prioritized in strategic federal procurements. This applies immediately to contracts valued at $25 million and over, but the policy will expand to contracts valued at $5 million and over by the spring of 2026. In other words, companies with a real footprint in Canada, those that invest here, employ Canadians, and innovate domestically, will receive a clear advantage when they bid on federal contracts.
Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem says even though the inflation rate in our country remains steady at 2.2%, there is a large concern over food inflation, which continues to increase. The annual rise in the cost of food bought from grocery stores hit a nearly 2-year high at 4.7% last month. thanks largely to rising prices for berries, beef, and coffee. Macklem says it appears as though there are a few reasons why food prices keep increasing. He says he expects those pressures to ease in the coming months.
We've seen bad weather has resulted in poor harvests in a number of countries. That's affecting food prices around the world. In the case of some goods, U.S. tariffs are having an impact. For example, coffee.
I sat down with Dr. Sylvain Charlebois with the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University to break down the latest food inflation numbers. So grocery inflation is now at a nearly 2-year high. From your perspective, what's driving this latest increase?
Well, it's mostly structural, to be honest, because we've been dealing with this food inflation headache for quite some time, since the great financial crisis of 2008, to be honest. So there was this decoupling between food inflation and inflation, which is hardly recognized by any experts, really. And so what I mean by structural issues, you have to look at logistics, interprovincial trade barriers, supply management. You have to look at labeling issues, labor issues as well. There's lots to cover, and unfortunately, I think we've failed to recognize that the problem is not just cyclical or temporary due to greed or climate change. It's much more than that. If there's one thing that affects food prices one year, there'll be another. And so it's this lack of recognition that we have a food industry unable to absorb financial and economic shocks is really the problem. Because in the US, both food inflation and inflation has actually been increasing in lockstep, really. And so it's not normal to see the American food inflation being lower than ours, given that that America has a tenant in the White House very much focused on tariffs, which actually makes everything more expensive in the United States. It's not normal to see that right now.
Well, and the Bank of Canada points to higher prices for items like beef, berries, and coffee. Are these short-term pressures, or are there signs of deeper structural issues in the food system?
Well, I'd say so. If you actually take out meat from the CPI, you go from 4.7% to 2.6%. So meat is clearly the problem. But again, going back to meat is a perfect example of Canada's problem. So you have the catalyst there was climate change, forcing beef producers to sell herds, to sell livestock prematurely because feed costs were so high. That was 18 months, 2 years ago. But now they're exiting the industry. Now that demand, that spooked demand shifted towards chicken. And with chicken, we're not producing enough chicken despite supply management. And so we're importing more chicken from the United States, about 45 million kilos in the last few months. But we're supposed to be producing more chicken as a result of supply management. That's because nobody really can become a chicken farmer unless you own very expensive quotas. So again, you have a system, and they haven't matched their demand in 9 cycles, which means they haven't produced enough chicken in a year and a half, which is why whole chicken prices are up about 27% year to year right now. And so that's the kind of story that we're not talking about that is structural, and it's impacting meat economics at the meat counter, not just beef, but it's impacting chicken, and pork also is on the rise. We're expecting pork prices to become more expensive in a new year as well.
And are retailers contributing to higher prices, or are grocers simply passing on increased costs?
Well, when you look at margins, they haven't really changed all that much. And I tend to look at gross margins, and gross margins are revenues minus the cost of goods sold. And when you look at their food business, gross margins haven't really changed for Empire, Sobeys, Loblaws, or Metro. So that's certainly not a concern to us.
And what does this level of food inflation mean for Canadian households that are already stretched on higher interest rates and housing costs?
Well, so the Bank of Canada paused last week, which means that the economy is not doing too badly, and inflation is not necessarily a concern. I think that's going to help. I mean, households had a good year this year with low interest rates, so that's certainly going to help. People are showing up with more money in their pockets at the grocery store because they're spending more money at the grocery store. For many months last year, people were just spending what they had, and it was actually less.
Coming up after the break, officials at Skate Canada say they will not be hosting any national or international events in Alberta due to a provincial law prohibiting transgender athletes from competing. We'll be right back after these messages. Officials at Skate Canada say they will not be hosting any national or international events in Alberta due to a new law prohibiting transgender athletes from competing in female-only sports. The group says its decision was made after assessing Alberta's Fairness and Safety in Sport Act, which took effect last September. Skate Canada says it is unable to host events in Alberta while maintaining its standards for safety and inclusivity. It says Albertan athletes will still be able to participate in Skate Canada programming and competitions. Federal Environment Minister Julie DeBruzen announced more measures to address methane emissions while hoping to spur investment in energy and clean technology. Speaking in Vancouver, DeBruzen says tightening the oil and gas regulations will help reduce methane gas by 304 megatons from 2028 to 2040, while giving companies a couple of options in which to comply. In addition to the new regulations, the government is also announcing nearly $16 million in funding for investment in methane emission reduction technologies across Canada.
I'm proud to announce the final enhanced oil and gas methane regulations and landfill methane regulations. These two measures will drive down emissions from two of the largest sources of methane in Canada. This announcement is about building the strong economy of the future, one it is cleaner, more competitive, and more resilient. Methane is one of the most potent, dangerous drivers of climate change, but it's also one of the fastest and most cost-effective opportunities to cut emissions while creating jobs and growing our economy. By tightening methane rules, we are driving innovation, supporting Canadian companies that develop leak detection, monitoring, and clean tech solutions that are in demand around the world. Clear, predictable regulations give industry certainty, attract investment, and ensure Canadian energy remains competitive in a world that is moving towards lower carbon production. This is real climate action that works for workers, communities, and Canada's long-term economic prosperity. These new enhanced oil and gas regulations are designed to significantly cut methane emissions by over 304 megatons from 2028 to 2040, while giving operators flexibility in how they comply. Companies have two choices. They can follow a clear set of actions to stop intentional venting of emissions and fix leaks, or they can choose a performance-based pathway that uses continuous monitoring and allows them to design their own solutions as long as they meet strong performance standards.
While Ottawa pushes ahead with new climate measures aimed at reducing emissions, the electric vehicle industry is facing some serious challenges. One of the most significant developments comes from Ford, which is making dramatic changes to its EV strategy, a move that could reshape the future of the electric vehicle market. Our contributor, David Clement, has the full story.
Tonight, we're going to take a look at a seismic shockwave ripping through the automotive world. Ford Motor Company has just unleashed a bombshell, a radical gutting of its electric vehicle empire, swallowing a jaw-dropping $19.5 billion in charges, mostly slamming into the fourth quarter like a financial avalanche. Now, picture this. Ford is torching its dreams of a fully electric F-Series truck, slamming the brakes on pure EVs and veering back into gas-guzzling giants and hybrids. The legendary F-150 Lightning, well, it's getting a hybrid makeover with extended range in a desperate bid to salvage sales in a market that is turning ice cold on battery-only rides. CEO Jim Farley didn't mince words, saying that the operating reality has changed and that we are redeploying capital into higher growth opportunities.
So look, the last couple of months have been really clear to us. The EV market shrank to about 5% of the U.S. market, but more importantly, the very high-end EVs, the $50,000, $70,000, $80,000 vehicles, they just weren't selling. And we had planned a full EV lineup, but we also have hybrids, and we learned a lot about the market. And we think it was the right time to listen to the customers. We evaluated the market, and we made the call. We're following customers to where the market is, not where people thought it was going to be, but where it is today, Phil. And that's really the genesis of our announcement. Be better for the company's profitability, better for shareholders, and a lot of new American jobs.
Ford's EV arm, Model E, has been hemorrhaging cash like a sinking ship. $5.1 billion lost last year, with even deeper wounds projected this time around. But Andrew Frick, the EV chief, fired back with defiance. These are big decisions that we believe will pay off for years. Rather than pouring billions more into massive EVs doomed to flop, we're channeling that firepower into winners. But the carnage doesn't stop there. Ford is slamming the doors on its Glendale, Kentucky battery plant, a $2 billion beast meant for EV cells, which is now pivoting to energy storage that could fuel AI data empires and power grids. This brutal shift idles 1,600 workers in a heartbreaking layoff, although Ford does vow to roar back with 2,100 new hires by 2027. Now, after a messy divorce from a South Korean partner, Ford's seizing full control, ditching old tech for cheaper lithium iron phosphate cells, licensed from China's CATL juggernaut, all aimed at exploiting into the red-hot energy storage arena, where U.S. utility-scale capacity has skyrocketed 50% this year to a colossal 39.3 gigawatts. In Marshall, Michigan, another plant is flipping to crank out these cells for storage, and a fresh wave of pint-sized wallet-friendly EVs hitting the streets in 2027. And down in Stanton, Tennessee, well, Ford's first new assembly fortress in 50 years, once destined for electric haulers, now gets flipped for gas trucks, with its grand opening shoved back to a distant 2029 in a stunning delay. The fallout, well, a cash hemorrhage of $5.5 billion, mostly next year. Yet, in a twist of optimism amid the ruins, Ford's jacking up its 2025 profit forecast to $7 billion before interest and taxes, up from a tepid $6 to $6.5 billion. But this isn't just Ford's apocalypse, it's industry-wide. It echoes of General Motors' $1.6 billion EV gut punch in October, and Farley's dire warning that EV demand could crater under the current administration's policies' wrecking ball of stripping away incentives. Ford's epic unraveling here exposes the raw chaos of the EV revolution, where we have fickle buyers, policy earthquakes, and a brutal fight for survival. As jobs hang in the balance, stocks teeter, and the green dream flickers, we'll be glued to every twist in this high-stakes drama from Detroit. Back to you.
And New Brunswick has become the first province to sign an agreement with the federal government to create a joint environmental assessment process for major projects. Premier Susan Holt made the announcement alongside Federal Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc. Holt says the two governments have agreed to remove duplication in a simplified environmental review process for major projects.
Our environmental impact assessment process is rigorous and well established. It's robust and it's flexible enough to deal with a wide variety of complex issues. We're pleased that the federal government has recognized the robustness of our province and has joined with us to make sure that we reduce this duplication and redundancy to ensure a coordinated process. Our process will continue to be thorough, evidence-based, and guided by an expert review panel consisting of local, provincial, and federal agencies, ensuring that questions and feedback on major projects are all addressed before final decisions are made. We're committed to working closely with our federal partners and our local partners to meet both regulators' requirements and to deliver on the goal of one project, one review. The federal government has committed to continue providing participant funding to First Nations who want to be involved in these important reviews. Protecting the environment remains the objective, and through aligned federal and provincial environmental impact assessment processes, while maintaining our robust environmental protections, First Nations participation, and public engagement, we are going to make this happen in a way that responds to the times that we are in. We're proud of the modern partnerships and transparent partnership that we're building. Working together, we can do big things here in New Brunswick.
Global trade is evolving, and Canada is taking decisive action to not only respond to the hinge moment in which we find ourselves, but to strengthen Canada's economy in every part of the country as well. Today's announcement is a testament to Premier Holt's leadership, to the leadership of her government in responding to this fundamental economic shift. And I want to thank her and her colleagues for being the first government to sign this cooperation agreement since we launched negotiations in this regard last June after the First Minister's meeting.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a forceful Hanukkah speech at Jerusalem's Western Wall, calling Israel's conflicts a battle for civilization. He drew on Judeo-Christian values and historical parallels, linking Israel's struggles to anti-Semitic violence abroad. His remarks come a few days after a deadly attack at a Hanukkah event in Australia, highlighting the global urgency of the message.
I said, Mike, that we are fighting today the battle that the Maccabees fought. They fought for the survival of the Jewish people and the Jewish faith against an enemy that wanted to extinguish us, wipe us out from the face of the earth. We were fighting our battle, but we were also fighting the battle of civilization, because our civilization is based on the Judeo-Christian tradition. And if the Maccabees had failed, there'd be no Judaism, there would be no Judeo-Christian civilization. There would be no Maccabees. There would be no United States, there wouldn't be the civilization of freedom, the respect for our common traditions, our common values. All of that would not happen if it weren't for those 5 brave brothers. They actually made the whole difference. So that spirit animates these brave soldiers that are here today and their comrades who are fighting in Gaza or in Lebanon or in Iran, wherever is necessary to not only preserve the Jewish nation and the Jewish state, but preserve civilization against the barbarians. The barbarians are out there. They did a horrible thing to us on October 7th. They'll never do it again. But they're doing it against Jews in Sydney and Jews elsewhere in America and elsewhere. This is our common battle against the barbarians. We have won it here, we're winning it here, we'll win it everywhere.
President Donald Trump will deliver a primetime address from the White House today at 9 p.m. ET, marking nearly a year since his return to office. Trump announced the speech on Truth Social, but did not provide details on what topics he plans to cover. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt told reporters that Trump will recap his administration's accomplishments over the past year in the speech.
I'll say a couple of things on that. First of all, as you all saw on Truth Social, President Trump is going to be giving a joint address an address to the nation, not a joint address, an address to the nation tomorrow night, live from the White House here, 9 o'clock Eastern. I know you guys will all be tuning in. It's going to be a really good speech. I was just in the Oval Office with the president discussing it. He's going to talk a lot about the accomplishments over the past 11 months, all that he's done to bring our country back to greatness, and all he continues to plan to do to continue delivering for the American people over the next 3 years.
And U.S. President Donald Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, offered unusually candid assessments of the administration and its inner circle in a rare, wide-ranging series of interviews published Tuesday by Vanity Fair. Wiles addressed a number of sensitive issues, including Elon Musk's reported drug use, appeared to question Vice President J.D. Vance's political transformation into a Trump ally, and acknowledged that the president's tariff policies have been more painful than expected. She also suggested Trump may continue his aggressive posture toward Venezuelan vessels and said some of the legal actions taken against political opponents could be viewed as a form of retribution. Following the article's release, Wiles took to X for the first time in more than a year, dismissing the piece as a disingenuously framed hit piece, pushing back on its portrayal while stopping short of disputing the specific quotes attributed to her. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt dismissed the story as disingenuous and wildly out of context.
This is, unfortunately, another example of disingenuous reporting, where you have a reporter who took the chief of staff's words wildly out of context, did not include the context those conversations were had within. And then further, I think the most egregious part of this article was the bias of omission that was clearly present. And we see a lot of this when dealing with the media every day. You will leave out important context, leave out comments and facts. You know, many people in this building spoke with that reporter, and those comments were never included in the story, probably because it didn't push this false narrative of chaos and confusion that the reporter was clearly trying to push. So what I'll say about our chief of staff, as you've seen from not just myself, but also the entire cabinet, and a groundswell of support from people on Capitol Hill who don't even work in this building, about how incredible Susie Wiles has been to President Trump. And he's been able to accomplish so much because of his leadership and his tenacity, but also because of Chief of Staff Wiles's leadership and her ability to effectuate his agenda.
J.D. Vance also responded to the Vanity Fair article, defending Susie Wiles and backing her loyalty.
And you know why I really love Susie Wiles? Because Susie is who she is in the president's presence. She's the same exact person when the president isn't around. I've never seen Susie Wiles say something to the president and then go and counteract him or subvert his will behind the scenes. And that's what you want in a staffer. Because as much as I love Susie, the American people didn't elect any staffer. They elected the President of the United States. And what you want in a staffer is a person who understands they are there to effectuate the will of the American people, and they're there to follow the orders of the duly elected Commander-in-Chief of the United States. And Susie Wiles, we have our disagreements. We agree on much more than we disagree, but I've never seen her be disloyal to the President of the United States, and that makes her the best White House Chief of Staff that I think the President could ask for.
The search for a gunman who opened fire at Brown University on Saturday, killing 2 students and injuring 9 others, continues as local and federal authorities release new footage to help identify the suspect. Police in Providence and the FBI released new photos and videos of a person of interest in Saturday's deadly shooting at Brown University as the manhunt for the gunman reaches the 4-day mark. The FBI is offering a $50,000 reward for information that will lead to the identification, arrest, and conviction of the university shooter. During a press briefing on Tuesday, officials were pressed about why the engineering and physics building lacks sufficient security cameras, despite Brown University's $7.2 billion endowment.
Cameras in the hallway, but they don't show the suspect, or Brown is not releasing them, or you're not releasing them to us. How does a multi-million-dollar school not have a bunch of cameras in the hallway?
So let me try to explain that. So, as President Paxson knows, there was a major addition put on that building within the last 5 years or so. That is a modern building attached to a much older one in the back. So it doesn't come as a surprise to me, at least, that there are cameras in the newer part of the building. And there is video footage, okay? So there's the back part of the building, old part, and front part, new part. The shooting occurs in the old part, towards the back, up towards Hope Street. In that older part of the building, there are fewer, if any, cameras in that location. I imagine because it's an older building. So as students are fleeing the area of the shooting into the new part of the building, there are cameras in that brand new building that show that chaos. But the only video of the presumed, anticipated, suspected, however you want to define it, person of interest, you have it. We would release it if we thought it would be helpful in identifying this subject because we are relying on the press and public to help get us there. There would be no reason for us to hold it back. We're looking for the best image we can.
Dan, got a follow-up.
Taylor Swift's record-breaking Eras tour didn't just shatter music industry records, it also set a rare standard for how global pop spectacles reward the people behind the scenes. When the Grammy-winning tour wrapped up in December 2024, people reported that Swift distributed nearly $200 million in bonuses to the thousands who helped bring the massive production to life. And those payouts weren't just for the headline performers. They reached everyone from production staff and personal assistants to carpenters, dancers, truck drivers, and band members. The people whose work often goes unnoticed, but it's essential to making a tour of this scale possible.
The tour has done really well, thanks to all of our hard work. So if you will kindly read this message.
Taylor Swift. Okay. Oh. Dearest Cam, we've traveled the world like we set out to do. We've dazzled the crowds, but we've missed family too. My full gratitude doesn't come from a bank, but here's... dollars just to say thanks. Love, Taylor.
Father was the one that presented the checks to our drivers, and he presented handwritten letters from Taylor. It's incredible.
I know tour truck drivers, and I've asked, do artists usually give out these big bonuses? Unheard of.
What's wrong, Max? He's emotional. Oh my God, do you need a hug? Are you okay?
I'm gonna pass out.
Love you guys so much.
Coming up after the break, more rain is being forecasted for southwestern BC just after heavy rainfall triggered flood warnings in parts of Metro Vancouver. After that, Leon Draisaitl hit another major milestone. We'll have this story and more of today's top national and international headlines after the break. Forum Daily News will be back shortly. There has been a lot of talk in our country over the years about reconciliation. Thomas Isaac is an Aboriginal law expert in Vancouver, BC, and former chief treaty negotiator with the BC government. He says reconciliation begins with a booming economy. He shared details recently with our Western Canada Bureau Chief, Hal Roberts.
So, Tom, let me ask you something. How will a booming economy in British Columbia really help with reconciliation?
Well, reconciliation costs money. It costs land, it costs resources. And the particular challenge that British Columbia has that no other jurisdiction in the country has is that British Columbia has 1/3 of the First Nations in Canada in British Columbia. That's over 200 First Nations. And most of those have unsettled claims. Not all of them, but most of them. So when you run the numbers, you quickly run out of runway based on where our economy is at today. We need a booming economy in order to afford reconciliation. And you know, that's not an anti-reconciliation comment. That's actually a pro-reconciliation comment, but I would call it a real reconciliation comment, and so obviously a pro-Canadian economy comment as well. But we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Robust economy and reconcile. If we try to reconcile without a robust economy, we will not be able to achieve the objectives we need to achieve.
Will that maybe include that pipeline in the northern part of your province?
Absolutely. We should be welcoming pipelines to the province of British Columbia. We need to be welcoming forestry back to British Columbia, mining back to British Columbia, pipelines, oil, gas back to British Columbia. Look, we also need to be concerned about our environment, but again, we've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We do not have the luxury of not being part of the wage economy or part of our country's economy in British Columbia. And especially given our very desperate needs to reconcile with First Nations and Métis in British Columbia. British Columbia has a lot of catching up to do economically. And so any notion that we can sort of take our time and, gee, we'll see how this works out. I think we're in an emergency situation in British Columbia, and we need to be wide open to welcoming capital back to this province so that we can actually have higher standards of living, whether it's education or health, for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And I don't think it's open for debate. I think everybody here, certainly, I live in British Columbia. I would say everybody I talk to feels it and knows that to be true.
Now, Tom, you're an expert in Aboriginal law. A number of landowners in your region are really concerned about land claims. You believe the claims are much higher than just the 800 or so acres of private, public, and industrial land in the Richmond region?
Well, we've had a decision, it's being referred to as the Cowichan decision in August of 2025, and that affirmed Aboriginal title over 800 acres. That included private property. I've been very public in saying I don't believe that's consistent with the existing law in this country. Keep in mind that all of British Columbia has some form of asserted or settled claim on, and certainly asserted claims. And those asserted claims are either judicially filed claims or assertions of Aboriginal title that have yet to be filed in court. But as I said earlier, we've got over 200 First Nations in British Columbia, so the entire province is claimed. This isn't just the city of Richmond or the city of Vancouver. It's almost every square inch of British Columbia. So that underscores the challenge. You know, whether it's fair or not, I think is almost irrelevant. That is the reality of British Columbia.
So how's that going to work with reconciliation if different parties are fighting over land?
Well, what it means is, and again, what I've been very public about is, look, there's a role for courts, there's a role for industry, there's a role for Indigenous governments, but this fundamentally lands back on the provincial and federal governments. Make no mistake about it. I've been doing this a long time. I believe the courts have been very clear. We need strong, vibrant public government leadership. This is not an Indigenous government problem. I reject that. As a broad statement, I want to be clear. I'm being broad here in my statement. We need public government leadership, and we need a robust economy to pay for it.
So if the land claims are upheld by the higher courts, Tom, what kind of an impact could this have across Canada? Could this be precedent setting?
Well, certainly the Cowichan decision on private land is very concerning. We need to get back to indefeasible title being indefeasible. We cannot be threatening people's private lands, period, in this country. That is not a starting proposition. We recently had an appellate court out on the east coast of Canada affirm that private lands and that Aboriginal title and private property don't go together. Well, that's positive. That's very positive news. But for British Columbia right now, we need to see some very proactive public government leadership. And I do believe we can work our way through it, but we have got to be more audacious, if I can say, in our public policy framework and really leaning into a strong, robust economy and not being afraid to lay ground rules out of what reconciliation means. One example would be your question. We cannot be putting private lands at risk, people's private property. That is not reconciliation in Canada. We all know that to be true. That can't be reconciliation.
Aboriginal law expert Tom Isaac, thanks so much for joining us today from Vancouver.
My pleasure.
More rain is being forecasted for southwestern BC, just after heavy rainfall triggered flood warnings in parts of Metro Vancouver. Environment Canada issued new rainfall warnings of up to 70 millimeters of precipitation for both Metro Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. Other warnings are also in effect on Vancouver Island. Heavy rain triggered flood warnings for Metro Vancouver's North Shore just days after another storm system caused the Newscast River in Washington state to overflow into parts of the Fraser Valley. Japan will soon lose its last two giant pandas kept in Tokyo's Ueno Zoo. back to their home in China as an act of diplomacy, meaning that the country will be without pandas for the first time since 1972. The twin pandas were born in the Tokyo Zoo in 2021 and have been a main attraction at the zoo for years. As the zoo anticipates a flood of visitors until January 25th, the final viewing day for the twins, Ueno Zoo has begun restricting viewing at the Pandas Pavilion to about a minute and will require online reservations starting next week. For the last 12 days, a lottery will be drawn to pick the lucky winners. And Leon Draisaitl recorded 4 assists Tuesday night and became the 4th fastest active player in NHL history to reach 1,000 career points. Draisaitl reached the milestone in the first period with a secondary assist, becoming the first German-born player to hit 1,000 points. He's also the 5th player in Oilers franchise history to reach the mark.
The Oilers need it. These top 5 have been out there for nearly 3 minutes. Draisaitl to Bouchard, back to Draisaitl, cross McDavid, feathered in front, score! Zach Hyman, and that's point number 1,000 for Leon Draisaitl. Power play goal, Hyman, 1,000 for Draisaitl, and the entire bench out to celebrate.
Well, big congratulations to Leon Draisaitl, 1,000 points, and that's moving the puck around. That was 3 sharp passes in succession that eventually resulted in that goal, and it's Zach Hyman that redirects, taps it home past his old goaltender, Stuart Skinner. And there it is, tape that one up.
The star forward spoke to the media after reaching the milestone.
Yeah, a lot. I mean, a lot of hard work, a lot of people that help along the way. You know, these accomplishments, they're always directed at the single player, but there's so many people that play such a big part in that. And I'm highly aware of, you know, the fact that I got a lot of people in my life over the last couple of years that have just, you know, kept everything off my plate and kind of let me do what I do and what I want to do. And just super grateful, super thankful, and of course a little bit proud.
Could young Leon ever dream of something like this?
No, it was surely just a dream, yeah. You know, growing up in Germany, seems like it's a long ways, you know. So obviously I'm extremely proud of that, but again, I don't want to underestimate how much work, you know, comes from the outside as well.
The Toronto Tempo are set to make a stylish entrance when they take the court for their WNBA debut next season. Canada's first ever WNBA franchise marked another milestone Tuesday morning ahead of its inaugural 2026 season, unveiling both its home and away uniforms. The jerseys feature Toronto's signature maroon, blue, and white color scheme, along with 6 distinctive tempo lines running down the sides, a design element meant to represent the city's 6 boroughs and the rhythm of the team's name. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Good night, Canada.